had learned on the 13th of November through one of his scouts that the army under his command was in an almost helpless position. The scout had brought word that the French, in overwhelming numbers, had crossed the bridge at Vienna and were marching to cut off the communication between Kutuzov and the reinforcements coming to him from Russia. If Kutuzov decided to remain at Krems, then Napoleon's army of 150,000 men would cut him off from all his communications, would outflank his exhausted army of 40,000, and then he would be in the same position as Mack at Ulm. If Kutuzov decided to abandon the road leading to his point of communications with his reinforcements, then he would be obliged to penetrate into the unknown and pathless region of the Bohemian mountains, defending his rear from the constant attacks of the enemy on his trail, and giving up all hope of effecting a junction with Buxhovden. If Kutuzov determined to take the highway from Krems to Olmütz so as to meet the reinforcements from Russia, then he ran the risk of being anticipated on this route by the French, who had crossed the Danube at Vienna and would be likely to force him to fight in the middle of the march, burdened with all the luggage and heavy baggage, and to deal with an enemy double his own number, and surrounding him on every side. Kutuzov had decided on this last alternative. The French, according to the report of the scout, had crossed the bridge at Vienna and were in full march upon Znaim, which lay in the line of Kutuzov's projected retreat, more than 100 versts, about 60 miles, ahead of him. If they could reach Znaim before the French, they were in a fair hope of saving the army, but if the French were given a chance of getting into Znaim first, it meant the disgrace of a surrender, like that at Ulm, or else the general destruction of the army. It was certainly impossible to anticipate the French with all the troops. The road which the French would traverse from Vienna to Znaim was both shorter and better than the road which the Russians had from Krems to Znaim. On the night after receiving this information, Kutuzov sent 4,000 men of Bagration's vanguard over the mountains to occupy the road from Vienna to Znaim. Bagration was ordered to make this short cut without pausing to rest. He was to face Vienna and turn his back on Znaim, and if he succeeded in anticipating the French, he was to do his best to hold them in check. Kutuzov himself, with all the baggage, would hasten on towards Znaim. Bagration, crossing the mountains marching without a road, 45 versts on a stormy night, losing a third part of his forces in stragglers, came out with his famished, shoeless men at Hollabrunn, on the road from Vienna to Znaim, a few hours before the French reached it from Vienna. It was necessary for Kutuzov to travel a whole day and night with his baggage wagons before reaching Znaim, and therefore, in order to save the army, Bagration, with only 4,000 soldiers, hungry and tired out, was obliged to engage the entire force of the enemy during the course of the 24 hours. This was manifestly impossible. But a strange chance made the impossible possible. Having been successful in the piece of finesse which had given the French the bridge at Vienna without a blow, Murat thought that it would be fine to try a similar deception on Kutuzov. Meeting Bagration's feeble contingent on the road to Znaim, he supposed that it was Kutuzov's whole army. In order that there might be no question of his crushing this army, he determined to await the arrival of all the forces that had started out from Vienna, and with this end in view he proposed an armistice for 3 days, with the condition that both armies should not change their positions or move from their places. Murat asserted that negotiations for peace were already in progress, and that, therefore, in order to avoid the useless shedding of blood, he had proposed the armistice. The Austrian general, Count Nositz, who was posted in the van, credited the words of Murat's emissary and retired, exposing Bagration. Another emissary came to the Russian line to make the same assurances about negotiations of peace and to propose 3 days' armistice. Bagration answered that he was not authorized either to refuse or accept an armistice, and he sent his adjutant back to Kutuzov to carry the proposition that had been made to him. The armistice was, for Kutuzov, the only means of gaining time, of giving Bagration's toil-worn division a chance to rest, and of sending the baggage wagons and other things, the movements of which were concealed from the French, by a roundabout way to Znaim. The proposal for an armistice offered the only possibility, and one most unexpected, of saving the army. On receipt of this news, Kutuzov promptly sent his adjutant general, Winzengoroda, who happened to be present, over to the hostile camp. Winzengoroda was not only to accept the armistice, but also even to propose terms of capitulation, while, in the meantime, Kutuzov sent his aides back to expedite the movements of the baggage train of the whole army along the road from Krems to Znaim. The weary, famished contingent under Bagration was to cover this operation of the baggage train and of the whole army, and to maintain a firm front against the enemy 8 times as strong. Kutuzov saw that by discussing terms of capitulation, which did not bind him to anything, time would be gained for sending around at least a portion of the heavy baggage, but he also saw that Murat's blunder would be quickly detected. Both of these anticipations were realized. As soon as Bonaparte, who was at Schönbrunn, 25 versts from Hollabrunn, read Murat's report and his scheme for an armistice and capitulation, he saw through the hoax and wrote the following letter to him. Schönbrunn, November 16, 1805, 8 o'clock a.m. To Prince Murat. I cannot find words to express my displeasure. You merely command my van, and have no right to conclude an armistice without orders from me. You are making me lose the advantage of a campaign. End the armistice instantly and march on the enemy. Explain to him that the general who signed this capitulation had no right to do so, that only the Emperor of Russia has this right. However, if the Russian Emperor should ratify the proposed agreement, I also would ratify it. But it is only a trick. March. Destroy the Russian army. You are in a position to capture their baggage and artillery. The Russian Emperor's adjutant general is a blank. Officers are of no account when they are not endowed with any powers. This one had none. The Austrians let themselves be duped without crossing the Vienna Bridge. You have allowed yourself to be duped by the Russians. Napoleon. Bonaparte's aide galloped off at headlong speed to carry this angry letter to Murat. Bonaparte himself, not feeling confidence in his generals, moved toward the field of battle with all his guards, fearing lest he should be cheated of his prey, and the 4,000 men under Bagration, gaily building Bouvier fires, dried and warmed themselves, and for the first time in 3 days cooked their kasha gruel, and not one of the detachment knew or dreamed of what was threatening them. End of chapter 14.